Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Vivian Roberts, and I'm the Artistic Director and co-founder of Aleph Contemporary. Today, it is my great pleasure to introduce our two artists, both painters based in London, Miroslav Pomichal and Archie Franks, whose two-person show, The Stifled Cry, is now virtual on alephcontemporary.com. I am especially thrilled to introduce Sacha Craddock, who has written the curatorial text for the exhibition and who will chair the talk. Sacha Craddock is an art critic, writer, mentor, curator based in London. She is founder of Art School Palestine, co-founder of the Contemporary Art Award at the British School at Rome and Abbey Council member, trustee of the Sheila Cluett Trust, joint president of the International Association of Art Critics, AICA UK, and co-founder of the Spectrum Art Award. Sacha has been chair of the board of New Contemporaries and Selection Process since 1996.
My pleasure to speak to Archie and Miroslav about your exhibition. And I was thrilled to be invited to write a small piece of writing about the work. I just explained my involvement with the work. I've known Archie and his work for a long time, in fact, having taught him. I believe no longer can you say I taught someone because it seems imperialist, but I did teach Archie. We've been friends since, and I've actually talked about his work often and written about it. But the other side of this is this other work. I had no idea where it had come from. And during, I think last year, I was asked to look through some work. Vivian had asked me to look at some work, and I spotted paintings, which completely blew my mind. And I just want to say that when people listen to this and they think, oh, well, she would be talking about Archie, wouldn't she? Because she knows him. Honestly, art painting speaks before anything else. And so when I came across this other work, not knowing who the person who made it, I felt a great affinity and a great understanding for it. In other words, you only need to touch the very top of an iceberg and know that there's something, the very top. I just saw one image or two, and I thought this painting is fascinating. So what I like is that I was approaching this work from one sense of sort of knowledge or some kind of familiarity, and the other from none. And yet I had to bring them back together to the same place without falsely making conclusions. So it's a great pleasure now for me to talk to you both. And I'm going to ask a series of questions, which are very basic, but important. And with a certain amount of preamble each time as to what I think I'm asking and why. And I hope you enjoy the discussion, and I hope it's useful for other people. So I'm going to ask you some pretty basic stuff, and which is in a way I'm going to talk about education later because it's boring to start in the beginning, but much more your relationship, both of you, to the process of painting. And from what I know about Miroslav, that is something that came, and by the way, am I saying your name right?
Not really, it's Miroslav.
You say it.
But
Miroslav sounds like a sort of salad or something. I'm sorry, Miroslav. From what I read about you, that you came to this at a different stage in your life. I mean, you can explain that. And so what I want to know is your relationship, the actual making of painting. When did that start? And so I'm starting off with Archie, please. Archie, just give us a bit of a story.
So, well, I've always, I mean, I like, so my story is that I went with my mum when I was age 11 to see Jackson Pollock at the Tate, saw Jackson Pollock and saw Francis Bacon's paintings at the same time and thought this is very, very exciting. That's the first time I sort of found that felt something from painting and sort of thought that's what I want to do. So I was about age 11. So I was always interested in painting, and I guess I had sort of painting here. I was quite a romantic, and most teenagers are quite romantic and quite sort of, indulgent. And I wanted to be a musician or a painter or a writer. And I had all my sort of grunge musician heroes, which were too old for me, but I loved them. And then I had Jean-Michel Basquiat and Francis Bacon were two of my kind of absolute painting heroes. But I went to art school almost by accident, really, because I wanted to do English literature at university, but I had well, it's all very fashionable now, but I had quite serious mental health problems, which was sort of it derailed me from doing English literature at the time. So I had to do my English A level later, and I sort of my parents were like, why don't you do an art foundation while you're getting better? So I did that, and then found it very sweet. Convinced them that I could go to art school and everything would be okay. I sort of sat down and I was like, I really want to go to art school. There's not much you can do to talk me out of it, I'm afraid. And then went to City and Guilds, which was I don't know if you know City and Guilds, Sasha, but it was
I do,
lovely,
very gentle.
yeah, very gentle, sort of, almost, it's not quite an art therapy course, but it felt very sort of therapeutic, and it was very practical based. So it's painting based course. So I learned a lot about technique and sort of the practicalities of being a painter at City and Guilds. And then I was very lucky that I applied from the end of City and Guilds and got into the Royal Academy schools.
Anyway, we'll get on to education later.
Sorry,
I want to, in a way, right, it wasn't very, that's good. You gave us a bit of a background and your sense about the relationship to making work, how you thought of actually doing it yourself.
Yes.
So Miroslav, what about you? Because I believe this is a different process.
It's a different process, and I'm not actually very similarly to Archie and perhaps many painters. You start at the very beginning when you're a child. Of course, I'm not going to actually talk about that because maybe what you asked about a relationship to painting, actually for me that really happened towards the end of my MFA, where I realized what painting is and what painting isn't, and what kind of how it can betray you and how it can open its doors to you in certain ways. So, I always thought, like Archie, I was drawing, painting, but I did other forms of artwork as well, even before MFA, performance or poetry, other sculpture, installation, other forms of art. But with painting, I always saw it as representation. It's very naive, and I thought it was representation. It was representing something. I also thought that deformation or distortion of an image of representation, actually speaking about Soutine, we can mention that, he's very, very big on distortion, was an element of style in a naive way. I thought that was a kind of reflection of of who you are, of your personality. I don't believe any of that anymore. And actually, that more difficult relationship with painting only happened to me at the end of 2014, really. So when I finished my studies and I realized that painting isn't representation, it is an attempt at it in some ways, and in other ways it's completely the opposite. And it's and yet that materiality of it is the key. And what is it? It is, but it also points to something else, and that's basically when it happened. So, relatively recently, about 6 years ago.
Thank you. I mean, later on, I will talk about that, the idea of Soutine, the idea of art history and not positioning yourself in a grandiose way, but how you see that function. But I think probably the next thing I want to get to, which is a pretty tough question, but I think I might hear different things, is your relationship to audience. Now, I'm so not a moralist. I don't care what people do and who they speak to and so on. And I think that false ideas can be from both ends. One is that, I'm totally independent and autonomous and my work just exists in its own right and I don't give a toss about who sees it or whatever. And the other one is about some kind of striving to say something through this medium. And I think that, Miroslav, when you mentioned coming sort of the idea of realizing that painting isn't pure representation in a way, that it is doing something else, I think that quite leads us on very well. And I think, because you've just been speaking, no, I'd like you to carry on actually on this. So when you make your work, tell me the relationship to who you're speaking to.
Thanks, Sacha. It's a lot more difficult, I think, in the current art world or art market to move away from representation in painting, because there's a sense of audience, as well as some artists think that one's subject is, or one's subject of oneself as well, identity, let's say, or the subject that one is painting is what is being represented, is what is being said. So in that sense, I think we cut ourselves from a huge part of audience and a huge chunk of what could make us sustainable artists financially. I think maybe Archie is quite similar in that sense. So there is a huge part of me of doing what I want because I want to. But yes, it's not entirely selfish in the way that I think it is my own personal problem. I think there are themes in my work that have a validity or are important to our viewers of art. Okay, and one of those is that is the relevance of painting itself, and all these contradictions, like the spiritual and the material. Can you say something beyond the physical? But also this legacy of not just art history, but legacy of the West, legacy of Western Europe, legacy of Europe, and its politics, its society, its material culture, its and of course all the problems that come with it. So like this kind of underbelly of who we think of ourselves as, beginnings of nation states, all those periods that are seen as kind of mythical beginnings, and yet are, in some ways seem very monumental, but are, in other ways are figments of our imagination. So in that sense, that relates to audience who know about it in their reading or in their education or in their opinions.
But with your work, I mean, the reason I'm asking this question, and it's not an easy question, because what I see in your work is something that's very attitudinal. It's attitude. There's a sort of attitude which is to do with sort of play on heraldry and all this kind of idea of being strident and the joke of it, and the folly and the kind of imperial trump. So in a way, all that can be just you saying, yes, I'm saying that well, but it also, there is a kind of striking of a pose there, which is what I got in both yours, and which we will go on to. And I'm glad we're getting there so quickly, because, and with you, Archie, I think that this particular show has given me a chance, the opportunity to look at the way you go about things, and your relationship to still life is just fantastic, and it was actually quite radical when you were making these very visceral, lumpy things, of which I'm a proud possessor of one.
Yeah,
and they're just, and this idea of kind of making something exist, and then within that, I think, and I shouldn't be putting words in your mouth, asking a kind of question about why you might be doing that given various genre. So tell me about audience, Archie.
So audience is kind of an interesting question, because I think particularly it comes out of a kind of, well, I think because we're all kind of egomaniacs as artists, you want some kind of validity and response, don't you? So I think I thought, I didn't show for years. I didn't show my work for ages, really, until really I left art school, and I was in a couple of shows, and I thought it was very, very exciting being in shows and also having my work written about for the first times was very, very exciting, and I enjoyed that kind of relationship that the work has with the outside world. And so I think I'd be lying if I said that I didn't think about an audience response. So because I do think about an audience response, and I do sort of use each showing opportunity as a time to sort of pause and reflect and think about how the response could, how can I gauge, what is the response to the work, and if it's not kind of what I wanted, how do I move that response in a direction that I do want? And I think about for the first few years, I have thought about Britain and it's the politics of the country, my youth, and my relationship to transient pleasure, and how you can sort of put that across in painting. And I guess I have a sort of odd relationship with still life, which almost came about accidentally through having a bit of a crisis with my work a long time ago, and sort of saying, well, actually, let's just work with one genre, let's just work with still life for a bit. And I sort of added, a few years later, I added landscape to that genre, and I've actually added portrait. I've started doing some portraits as well, which I'll show you at some stage when we can see them. But so it came about through thinking about writers that write about in genres, and think, well, if I'm going to be a crime novelist, I'm going to be a still life painter. And so that was,
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, I'm going to interrupt. I'm going to interrupt because we have a lot to cover. But I think that you know, this idea. I mean, I just think when I think about painting, I always think about not what people will see, but what a painting seems to want not what people to see, but see how they call out to them or not. It's sort of whether it's exclamatory in some kind of way. And yours is more so than perhaps you realized. And that was because of saying, okay, sod it. It's a bit like Knausgaard, the writer, saying, I tried to write literature, but I couldn't. So I thought I'd just deal with what was in front of me. You know, this idea. It's a kind of myth, but it's not a bad one. And it still kind of works. It's completely different to your work, Miroslav. But there's this idea of, well, okay, there's a kind of limitation in life.
Yeah.
The limitation of genre is absolutely fantastic and full of potential still. So it's very interesting. So I was going to talk about education, but I really, I know about your education, Archie, and you kind of explained that a bit, and then you went to the academy and blah, blah, blah. So there's a kind of linear thing there, and you've always been sort of involved in it or done it. But I haven't quite worked out, unpicked your education, Miroslav.
So yeah, I've been a little bit less linear, I'm afraid, and you know, I've always been into art. So like Archie, and come from a family who really supportive of that. And yeah, but I chose to study history of art, my first degree, and actually I really wanted to go and study art, and I thought, what if, not parental pressure, I thought, what if I hate it? What if I hate it all? And what if I want to do something else? It was just a really basic, practical decision to do an academic degree. And I do enjoy reading, and I do enjoy writing. And I've been, you know, involved with history of art. I've been translating history of art books for 15 years, and in other ways as well. And I just enjoy it. But yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to trying to think about my own work. So I try to avoid that. Anyway, I did that. I then worked for a public gallery in Slovakia for a while, and I really didn't like it. It was it didn't seem to be the path that I wanted to go on. I in the meantime, I always made art. You know, be it performance art or photography or sculpture. All this time I was making art. Then I decided, well, if I hate working in a public gallery, being a curator, things won't improve if I go to London, because it's just a, you know, macrocosm of this microcosm in Slovakia. I'll just give it all up and make money. And so I applied, and I got a job in a law firm, and they sent me off to university to re-qualify to become a lawyer, and a city solicitor. You know, I have the hugest respect for people who work in the city and law. And to be honest, I actually wanted to try it out because I was a Marxist when I was at the Courtauld Institute, and then I realized that I may have been, you know, thinking in a bubble, that actually, how can I kind of denigrate an entire, you know, portion of society? In fact, I want to try it out for myself and make money. Yeah, I hate, well, the people were, as everywhere in England, are very, very nice and polite. But there is something hugely depressing about working in an office and working in this way, and working for money and being a lawyer, to to really working to avoid, for your clients to pay tax and do things that I don't think you can square, ethically. And I didn't like that. And all the time I kept making art. So anyway, I decided to, do another U-turn in my life. I thought I was in my 20s still. I can still do it, and I need to do everything that I can in my life to, what is it, 50 cents, you try to make it or die trying, just because I needed this to come out. And so I left it, prepared for my MFA by having a studio in Deptford, actually, Archie. And then I went to Slovakia for 6 months, and I read War and Peace twice by Tolstoy, and that kind of, it actually completely changed my outlook on life, Tolstoy's writings. And got into Wimbledon College of Art, School of Art, to do the MFA. And that's it. That's my education, basically.
Okay. So you both come from completely different angles. I mean, one through, and now here you are, put into a bloody online show. Even though it's great, it would be very good to have it for real, wouldn't it?
I know, it'd be lovely. Yeah,
but in a way, it's a slightly hypothetical notion. Having you together in this way is a kind of clever idea. Maybe the actual experience of both your things together is not the point. I mean, that leading on from our relationship to the audience as well. Okay, and then you have answered this. I mean, in a way, the relationship to the object, to sculpture. Now, both of you, I mean, Archie, you both kind of set things up. Miroslav uses shallow space to the point where it's relief, that there's almost like a description of the object anyway. I mean, it might as well be, it can't, as I said in my writing, it's like a sort of prop shop with kind of crappy armor that's almost been in a child's cartoon of armor, that is, the whole thing of imagery being, the whole history of kind of imperialism or something, all absorbed and then chucked out at the other end into this tawdry heap. But that is to do with describing actuality. Tell me, Archie, if you tell me about you and sculptural objects, and to do with the objectness of the painting, and then sculpture as well.
Well, I mean, so I was actually running a small class the other night, and I was showing Claes Oldenburg's hamburger sculptures, which I just love. I think they're brilliant, absolutely. And so I think my relationship to sculpture is a sort of pop art sculpture, and Jeff Koons was someone that I was interested in, and the kind of slippery nature of Jeff Koons's objects, where they kind of play with weight, and they were interesting to me somehow. So I think with the painting, it was also looking at Caravaggio's paintings, where they come out of you, and I sort of thought with my paintings, like, you could build them up so that they kind of they almost do come out at you, and they're kind of flat on a flat surface, and they're made out of paint, and they're not there, but they're also coming out of out of the space. So it's that relationship with the space that I was sort of interested in pushing with not all of them, but with some of the paintings, and that relationship with how you enter the space. Yeah, I don't know how sort of sculptural that is, but I mean,
well, it's just around that idea, which kind of leads us on to the Soutine thing.
Yeah,
which is that idea of the material not just describing something, but being in a way alluding to being that thing. Yeah. Which is what you're both into in some kind of way.
You're drawn to those painters that do that. There's like Wayne Thiebaud and Chardin, like loads of painters that do that. And Soutine, where the material itself is trying to emulate the substance.
And there are painters or artists who do that in a very different way, where you get a sort of literal use of material, like Rouchet using tea or blood or paint. So the thing is the thing in a completely even more literal way. That's conceptually slightly different, but it's not to do with volume in that way, but it's sort of like a conceptual use of material that carries through. But so I just wanted to think about that and the kind of function of these not very large objects that you both produce, the paintings that are objects in a way, which I like, the kind of transportable nature. But the yes, something kind of emphatic about the way the paint's used. But Archie, you do that less now, really, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I do it less, but I sort of, I mean, it depends with each painting in a way. So I've been trying to push myself a lot and trying to push each painting. Sometimes the landscapes.
Yeah, you try and pull back from it. You try and pull back from that.
Yeah.
Whereas Miroslav does this kind of like a send up of, you know, this is like, you want a painting, you know, you want a painting, all right, I'm going to give you, I'll do what you do in a kind of, as much as one has to kind of give it this sense of allusion to the effort of you know, the effort of painting. It's very interesting, and a lot of what you both do is about the relationship to ease and effort and the distinction between that, which I think comes right back to the relationship to the audience. It's like, you know, I'm doing a lot. It's like a sort of dog bringing, oh no, the cat bringing the mouse in or something, bringing it to you. You know, it's like showing something. What do you think about all that and a relationship to sculpture, Miroslav?
Thank you for asking. It is when you said ease and effort, it's absolutely, this is one of the central sort of problems or ideas that I think about, because yeah, the objects that I paint cannot conceivably exist. They are too light and too heavy at the same time, too planar, and too there is that mishmash. But they are painted often in a way that they could conceivably exist, but you know, not as the object that they kind of point to, but as cutouts or as cartoon imageries or as toys. And sculpture really likes. I wish I could be a sculptor. Just same as
don't wish it, because it's hell.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I wish
you know what you're doing with a painting. At least you two have some kind of thing to start off with. Imagine if you did something and it would go, what is it?
True. And I wish I were a writer. I wish I were a writer, because it means I could live, you know, in Venice or Istanbul or wherever and do my work there without the burden of a physical space. And I think that's one of the things that I'm kind of interested in my work as well, is that curse of being an object maker in today's age, when everything is becoming de-objectified and digitalized. But I love sculpture, and I did a lot of carving in wood, and perhaps my method of painting owes something to it. Instead of the reductive method of carving, I obviously apply the paint on, but it is often in such a way, or with such brushes, that they make those channels and those ridges, and they describe an object with contour lines. So yes, that my relation to sculpture is something that I'm very moved by sculpture, but it is not my,
you represent things as if in relief, as if pretense, and very much like a sort of not real collage, but the sort of very much to do with comic strips. So I hadn't really thought about postmodernism as a notion for a long time. It's been kind of very, and then suddenly I was in this slightly humorous idea of language again with both of you. So I was sort of in a strange other world, which was not a consideration I think you forced on me, but it was something about the combination of the two of you. It meant I had to think about this, you know, this idea of something could be reproduced. How do we see it? What is its value? All this kind of, these things which were helpful, but also made me very distressed at the end of the 80s.
Sorry.
So boring.
Sorry, Sacha.
No, not what you did, but what I felt at the end of the 80s. You weren't even around then.
No. So in terms of the postmodern discourse,
I felt it was like it was like a Pete and Dud record where they go, now is the end of the world, because it was like the end of art. And then then they sit at the top of a hill waiting for the end of the world, and then they go, oh, sorry, same time next week. I felt that's what it was like then. And then I'm looking at this work, and it doesn't remind me of endism at all. But it looks like both of you are sort of posing certain questions. At least that's the joy for me, because otherwise, what the hell are we dealing with?
Yeah.
And the idea of statement and pageantry, and then the idea of the circus. And by the way, my bit of writing, that it should be generations before, when it comes to Dickens.
No,
I mean, that's giving great credit, overdoing it. But the idea of a separate society, and and so on. So I think that I should ask you both a bit more about your relationship to. I mean, Archie, you talked about Soutine a bit. You both did. Let's just talk about language and imagery generally. I mean, that's very hard, but because I think both your works step outside that idea of painting, even though it's emphatically painterly or to do with painting, somehow you try to get us somewhere else, rather in the way that Oldenburg would make a sculpture, but would be soft, dealing with pop. Miroslav, what about kind of the relationship to comic strips and to illustration and familiarity in that way?
It's just very, very important. This is very much related, but you said something about imperialism and the iconography and the imagery that I use, and it's just important to say that in many ways it's also highly anti-imperialist, because it comes,
of course, I hope.
The imagery comes from two different traditions. One would be the Western tradition, where we see, let's say, medieval imagery in opposition to non-European things, because of the presence of other cultures and the history of worldwide trade, colonialism, etc., etc. And so it is seen therefore as something reactionary. In the East, Central Europe, so where I come from, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, in the communist era, this imagery was often employed to show historical precedents to anti-imperialist German or French dominate or Turkish oppression. So what you have is things like the Hussite movement, or in Poland, the Polish resistance against the Teutonic Knights, or in Hungary, the resistance against the Ottoman Turks. And so in this from the 50s, 60s onwards until the end of the communist era, when this kind of illustration collapsed, but there was this huge ideological sort of power in these kinds of objects. So on books and in various history books and novels and propaganda, but even things that wasn't really propaganda. It was just, you had this very, very strong graphic imagery of maces and helmets and all sorts of the paraphernalia, but it's seen not in fluttering and kind of cracked, but it was seen as the embodiment of the people, and how covered in this iron fist there was that beating heart and spirit of the people to reach the next stage of teleology. While obviously in the West it's a very, very different set of images, and because I'm 1 foot here, 1 foot there, in fact, because my work is all about contradiction, that tension is there with my work. And I was actually supposed to go and do my PhD in the Slovakian Academy of Fine Arts and teach there, and do my PhD thesis on this, on the idea that painting of armor, let's say, is as political resistance, as well as showing the contradiction between form and matter. So it's
I mean, I just have to say that what I love about painting, and I'm not saying I'm particularly brilliant or whatever, but I completely trusted it was saying all that in a weird way. I mean, I completely understood, you know what I mean? Painting is incredible. How does a bloody painting do that? Whole history of all that stuff about imperialism, about the other fighting this, using these shitty kind of cracked, you know, mock the enforced, you know, I did write a bit, but I took it out about the sort of the idea of the labor put into sort of burnishing out this ridiculously crap cartoon like sort of the metal holding the door together. I mean, this is just fantastic. And then you get this sort of the use of the rivet and the kind of intensity, which is about the decline of everything, because that was used in British sculpture in the 80s, or to denote the decline of industry, blah blah blah. So there's all that detail. Use of detail can create this whole political thing. I might have to just move quickly because we're running out of time to Archie to talk about this other interest, which is that idea of something that is still desirable but that's separate, which is a kind of metaphor perhaps for the romantic idea of art, and something like also food that's yum, but it's very popularist, but still goes. And so when I talked about Dickens, this wasn't me giving you a great puff. It was talking about somebody representing a society that's sort of separate to us. It runs parallel. That's a kind of dream. And tell me about how you've kind of came to that, how you've come to that, because I think it's a kind of development for you.
So fairgrounds are something that I always loved. So apparently when I was age 6, I wrote my first story all about dodgems. I was obsessed with dodgems, and so I remember from a very young age I was interested in fairgrounds. So they were kind of tied up with my youth quite a lot, but they also seem to sort of, there's something about like art fairs and the kind of circus nature of the art world that seemed to be, you know, quite an obvious metaphor, but kind of a thing nonetheless to draw upon. But also it was something about the culture of fairgrounds and the imagery that I found really interesting, that grabbed me, that was marginal, but it was pop, and it was kind of to the side of pop culture, and it sort of, there's something a bit gothic about it as well. So I did some research, and I found this amazing museum called Dingles, which all the audience who listens, they must all go to Dingles, which is this fairground museum in Lifton in Devon. And it's run by all these ex-carnies, and it has this extraordinary collection of fairground attractions and stuff from the 1800s through to about the 1970s or 80s. And you can go on the rides and everything like that. But I think, so there's something about like pop culture, leisure culture, consumer culture that always seemed to be interesting enough to make work around for me. And there's sort of lots of ideas around those kinds of culture. Like I talk about Ballard a bit in some of the stuff, but J.G. Ballard was a very big influence on me at college. And I think some of this sort of ideas about consumerism and about the consumerist landscape project that he kind of put about were very affecting for me going through art school. And so,
and the fact that the metaphor is that, you know, the idea is that this thing is fleeting, it's over. You know,
exactly.
We love it. It's like, I'm looking forward to a pint like mad tonight.
Oh yeah, everyone is.
I'll
the whole
have
world
one, and
is
then I'll have another, and then I suppose it'll be over because I have to leave.
I think that there's something about that, you know, I painted that painting last year, but it was something about that want of what you can't have, but also it's a fleeting experience.
Thing. It's not expensive, but that's the kind of populist myth. There's always this other. So I'm just going to finish with this thing, which I said, subject, which has been to, you know, is there one? What is it? How does it speak? And it's about loud or quiet, and claiming attention, but also not being worried. I think we've covered that as a whole. It's just that, you know, a warning against people and their relationship to painting, and you know, the life online, and the idea of people saying, what is it, and what's it about, and what does it do? And of course, neither of you in any way ever subscribing to that in that way. And that's why this talk has been useful, because at least we've kind of slightly tried to talk about the relationship to real life and politics and life lived and painting, but not that very literal expectation of the relationship between paint and subject. And there's, ugh. So I feel a bit heartbroken that we have to stop. But on the other hand, what I do think is that you speak brilliantly. You both paint brilliantly. And it's more important that this tape or whatever it is complete than if somebody has to start choosing as to what's important or what's not. So in a way, it's better to stop and then carry on talking in the future over a pint than anything else.
I think that sounds lovely. That sounds like a lovely idea, Sacha. But I think so do you want us to talk a little bit about subjects? Is that what you want?
Yeah, all right then. I was just about to but give it a bit. Both of you, just a very little bit, and then we'll go.
Sure. So you want to go first, Miroslav? Or?
Yeah, no, you go first.
I'm happy to go first then. And I just, very quickly, I can't really answer that question, but a friend of mine once in a WhatsApp, I sent him a picture and he goes, oh yeah, that's stone made flesh. And that probably is what I've been kind of trying to look at as a subject, stone made flesh, but also paint made into other things, and the transubstantiation, actually. Transubstantiation of all sorts of different things within that work. That's the subject.
That's a very good answer.
Cool.
Okay, well, I don't think I can have as succinct an answer as that. I think what my subject is convoluted in terms of like it's about my own youth and growing up, and about my position to the material world and the world that I find exciting. And it's about life, really. It's got to be about life, and it's about your own experience of life, and it's got to be about the things that are going to be able to connect with other people too. I think that's important.
I think that's perfect. Should we say that's it? Okay, really lovely to speak to you all. See you soon.
See you all soon. Bye, Sacha.